Hi, I'm Barbara O'Brien. I'm an animal trainer and photographer, and I'd like to welcome you to The Empathetic Trainer. Today I'm talking with Christine Beattie. Christine is a horsewoman, carriage driving trainer, and educator with a really interesting background. She spent over 25 years working with horses, including a lot of real-world driving in city environments. What I was really drawn to with her work is her focus on communication and relationship, especially through driving, which is something we don't hear talked about all that often. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Welcome to the Empathetic Trainer.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm in very wet Wisconsin. April. It's early April. Why don't you give us an idea of where you're located?
Yeah, so I'm in Calgary, Alberta, in Western Canada. And we, mid-April, we have winter one day, spring the next. So it's been, 4 inches of snow and then nice and sunny and warm, and then another dump of snow and then sunny and warm. So
a story of our life here too in northern Wisconsin. I get it. All right. Well, that's April. She's a mean girl. So there you go. Well, okay. So driving horses, it's not as near as many drivers or reinsmen as they be called as there are riders. And I think, gosh, every horse would benefit from driving training. So let's just start out with, how did you get into driving in the first place?
That's a great question. And I laugh because I got into driving quite by accident. So I grew up riding. I grew up in the hunter jumper world. And when I went to university out on the West Coast, I, finished my first year of university and I needed a summer job. I had chosen to stay in my college town for the summer. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm scrolling through online job postings as you do. And this would have been 2008, I guess. And I saw a posting it was actually for a ticket salesperson for one of the local carriage tour companies. Okay. And I thought, okay, that could be cool. That would, let me kind of be around horses, be outside, certainly worse summer jobs out there. And so I applied for the position. And in my interview, the manager said, well, do you have any horse experience? And I said, well, yeah, I've been riding for 10 years. And he says, oh, well, would you like to be a carriage driver? I said, I've never driven a carriage. I don't know the first thing. He says, that's okay.
A carriage. Yeah.
He says, seriously. But you're a horse person. You know horses. We can teach you to drive. So I said, okay, sure. And, I had no idea at that point what I was getting myself into and where that was going to lead. But I signed on as a carriage driver and basically got a week's crash course in how to drive a horse, how to maneuver a carriage in the city, in traffic, in, tourism, people, all of the activity. Now, the interesting thing, like a week doesn't sound like a lot of time, but a week of 8-hour days is more than the average student puts in a year in terms of actual teaching, learning time. So it's a very, very different environment than, if you're used to kind of one lesson a week, maybe 2 lessons a week if you're lucky. It's a whole different thing when you're sitting on that seat for 6, 7, 8 hours a day, all day, and surrounded by people doing the same thing. And so I, certainly in the beginning felt like I had no idea what was going on. And I remember, not only having to learn how to drive the horse, but also needing to learn where to go, all the different tour routes, all of the history. Because of course I have to give a guided tour and I have to keep these passengers entertained at the same time. So I'm, simultaneously learning the driving side of things, but also the tour guide side of things. And I was, especially in that period of my life, extremely, extremely introverted. And so the horsemanship part was honestly the least of my concerns starting out. But I remember, after that first week of training, the first day that I was on my own, and I was fortunate to have a really, a whole herd of really experienced driving horses who knew the job, knew the routes, just knew what to do, and really didn't need a lot from me other than which route are we doing at this particular point in time? And I remember getting to a T intersection and thinking, I don't even remember whether to turn right or left here. And I just said to my horse, okay, walk on, and just looked at which way he started to turn and just went with it, because I knew that this horse knew far more than I did at that point. And, it's very much like if you grew up riding school horses and you have those real school masters who just take care of you. And I was really fortunate to have those horses to kind of get me started. And then as that season went along, you put in, like I said, 6, 7, 8 hours a day, that adds up really fast. And a few months in, then I start to kind of feel like I know what I'm doing. And so they started to move me on to some of the horses that were maybe not quite as experienced, or just needed a little bit of input from the driver. And that was when I really started to learn the driving part of things. Because, on those school masters, the horse just does what the horse needs to do, and you're kind of along for the ride, hoping for the best in some ways. But once I graduated into that next tier of horses, and there's still horses that have lots of experience in the job. They know what to do, but maybe they just have that little quirk, or there's that one thing that they don't like, or there's just, there's a bit more, they just need a little bit more input from their driver, which starts to make it more of a partnership. And by that point, I had kind of enough, I had done the tours, done the routes enough times that I was like, okay, I kind of have my feet under me. I kind of have a sense of what we're doing. I can, babble about the history without having to think too hard about it. And so then I got to start paying a lot more attention to my horse. And that was when I really started to learn a lot, because the cool thing about driving is you can see your whole horse, right? You're sitting behind him. So you can see his ears, you can see his neck, you can see his back, you can see the movement of his pelvis, that as a rider, you're trying to feel, but you never get to actually see with your eyes. And when you're driving, you see his whole body or her whole body. And so, having the background in horsemanship that I had, well, now I'm spending 6, 7, 8 hours a day observing the horse. And, you start to notice the slightest little twitch, or the slightest little shift of weight, or, the things that as a rider you feel. As a driver, you feel them in your lines, certainly, but you also see them visually. Yeah. And so then I really started to kind of make it an experiment in some ways, that, okay, what does this horse need from me? What can I do to help him to go even better, to help him, okay, I notice, today maybe he's feeling a little bit stiff in his turns to the right, just ever so slightly, things that 3 months ago I wouldn't have noticed. But I've got to know this horse, and I've got to know this job, and now I'm noticing, oh, there's a slight unevenness there. Well, what can I do to help smooth that out? And, I almost became like a little bit of a scientist in a way, that I'm just, okay, if I do this, how does my horse respond? Oh, okay, I totally got in his way there. Okay, won't do that again. What if I do this instead? And so in that way, I really got to learn through a lot of miles and a lot of trial and error what each of these different horses needed from me. And I started to feel, patterns and similarities. And, oh, if I close my hands in this way instead of that way, I tend to get a softer response. And that's when I really, I think, started to grow as a driver. And, I remember moments, and then it was around that time, I guess, a couple months into my first season, that they then started to train me on teams or pairs.
That's a whole thing.
And that's a whole other thing, exactly. And so that was kind of a crash course on its own. And then the same process, right? You start out with the easiest ones, and then you gradually progress to the horses that need a little bit more from the driver. And, I can think kind of going into my second season, where I really started to drive some of those more, in some ways, more complicated horses. I don't love the word complicated, but again, horses that just needed a little bit more from me. And I remember, the route that we would take driving these teams, we were doing tours for the cruise ship passengers. So it was a big cruise ship port, and we would, with the teams, we had these big trolleys. We could seat 20 passengers. We would pick them up right at the cruise ship dock, take them on an hour tour through town and back to the cruise ship. really lovely way to see the city for folks just in town for the night. And part of that route came right past the carriage stand where all of the single horse carriages were waiting. And so there was always kind of this moment where it's like you're parading past all of the other drivers. And I have some really fond memories of, especially as I started to drive the more, quote unquote, advanced horses, that I would drive past that carriage stand, and some of the other drivers, some my colleagues, some at some of the other operators, but they would just say, "Oh, Christine, your team looks great tonight." Or even fewer words, looking good. Or even just a smile and a thumbs up. But that feedback from drivers who I knew had been driving for, 10, 15, 20 plus years, those little moments of feedback as we came past gave me so much confidence that I was on the right track.
Well, this amazes me listening to you, because you are very young, it sounds like, in perspective.
I was
and responsible, like the safety alone, you're responsible 15, 20 passengers. And, if you're 19, 20, 21, however old you are at that point. I mean, part of my mind goes like, wow, me at 19, would I really want to be responsible for the safety of and what if there was kids who fall off or, any number of crazy things. I mean, I know you have a safety talk, but people are still people. And not only the safety of the people, because I'm sure they were important to you, but I know that the safety of the horses was uppermost in your mind over anything else, because people are on their own in a way, but horses are doing something because we've asked them to. And so I know just from talking to you for the 5 minutes that how they felt and what they felt about their job was uppermost in your mind when
Absolutely.
If he's a little off, if he's feeling this, he's feeling that. I love hearing that. I mean, I wish everyone was that thoughtful. My question, you answered a lot of my questions that I already had, because you're a great speaker. But did you notice in your work, were the drivers as thoughtful as you, or were there some drivers more like, it's a machine almost, do the thing, or were they all drawn to this profession because they did care about their horses so much?
I would say largely the folks that I worked with were very, very thoughtful and really do put the horse first and foremost. And, it was an interesting dynamic. I didn't realize it at the time, but because we were a university town, almost all of the drivers were people like me, right? Horse girls who'd gone to university and then ended up in this summer job working with horses. And there was certainly a handful of what I'm going to call career carriage drivers, folks who'd been doing this as long as I'd been alive and then some. And, wonderful, wonderful horse people and wonderful mentors. Almost all of them, certainly. But I would say the top of mind concern for everybody was the horses. And how do I say it? In part of that, putting the horses first is also putting the drivers first, and putting especially the new drivers, supporting the drivers to be able to support their horses. And
that's very good.
I can remember one time, this would have been, I worked a little bit through the winters as well, especially around the Christmas season. I would pick up a bunch of shifts kind of during the exam break and things like that. And I can remember one evening where I was driving a horse who I very much adored. And it was a horse who had a little bit of herd boundness to him. Not terrible, but, when we kind of got to that point of the night where everybody was packing up to head home, he wasn't about to be left behind. And at that time, there was 3 different companies. We all kind of worked on the same street corner. We worked very much in tandem, but it was 3 separate operations. And my coworker at my company had headed in for the night maybe a half hour earlier. And so I was kind of packing up the last things to head in. And the other companies are doing the same. And a couple of the gals at one of the other companies recognized that I was on my own. I had this horse who was a little bit herd bound in moments. And they really went out of their way to make sure that I didn't get left behind, that I was good, that we all headed in together. It didn't matter that we were working for separate operations. We were all on the same team.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to
And
explain herdbound for people in our audience that might not understand.
yes.
Herdbound is when horses are a prey animal, so they get attacked in the wild. So in their mind, being alone is bad, and the herd means safety. And so as we train them and work with them and things like that, they have to learn that you can be safe with humans, and you don't have to worry about being with the herd so much. And some horses that takes a lot longer than others, or the right kind of handling. And so in a stressful situation, unless he's really confident in his handler, a horse, especially one that is much more sensitive and attuned to wanting to be with the herd, can get out of hand. I mean, can start forgetting you're even there, and can be starting to pull or rear or really have big reactions, which in a city setting can be extremely dangerous. It's one thing if they do it on your farm and they run back to the fence. It's another if they, whatever, you've seen videos, or the horse runs down the street. It's just, it's traumatic to watch because the horse is terrified. Obviously, these people cared enough about you and cared enough about the horse to make sure that you weren't put in a situation where you're the last horse standing. Like all of a sudden he looks around and goes, wait, there's nobody here. I need to panic. That's gratifying. And we're all, of course, gratified to know that the horses come first. And that's how we would want these places to be, so people can enjoy the unique experience of a carriage ride. I mean, I can't think of anything more wonderful. Of course we want, the horses to be taken care of, and it sounds like they were. Well, that's
Absolutely.
pretty cool. You know how it is when you talk to as an animal trainer, people want to tell me about their dog. I got to tell you about my driving because, we're together, right? I have Morgans, and I've always had Morgans. So
Wonderful.
Little compact, foundation style Morgans, and quite a few of them are trained to drive, which is
Lovely.
really nice. A lot of them drive. And when I was younger, and I have 4 sons, and they're all adults and grandchildren now, but when they were little, we lived on a different farm. I had this old retired Morgan mare that drove. Now, did I know how to drive? No. Did she know how to drive? Yes. And I had a little 2-wheel cart, and my farrier showed me how to hitch up the harness so that I didn't, at least I could do that hopefully correctly, right?
Wonderful.
And I would plop my little, I only had 2 sons at the time, because, and so they would be like 3 and 4 maybe. No helmets, nothing like that, because what do I know? Plop them on that little bench seat, nothing to hold them in, and we drive to daycare, which was in a farm community, so it was 2 miles away.
Oh, delightful. I love it.
Just to drive my little horse, because she was an angel. And you could always tell, like, when I was driving, because there'd be these tracks that are crooked, you can't see my hand, but they'd be crooked because she would just kind of walk, and I'd be like, I don't know how to, I was a rider. I know how to ride, been riding forever. I ride English, so I understand a direct rein.
Sure.
But it's just, what a forgiving, when you talked about those horses that were forgiving, we never had an accident. She was, I knew her we had her till she finally passed, but
Wonderful.
what a wonderful horse, And then
Absolutely.
years later, come across another Morgan horse, and they said, she knows how to drive. And I should know better by now, because I'm, 40 years old at this point. And we had moved to where we live now, this farm here. And we have 40 acres and a long half-mile driveway. And so it comes up and makes an L shape. And I said, well, she knows how to drive. Let's hitch her up. Like, did I give her time to adapt? Did I give her? No. Did I do any ground driving to make sure? No. Hitch her up, start the cart, go down. We have a little bit of go down the half mile all the way to the end of the driveway, which goes downhill. And that's fine. She's handling it, right? And I go, well, we're going to go back up the hill. So maybe I'll ask her to trot so she can, get a little momentum to make it a little bit easier to go up the hill, because it was a mild hill, but whatever. I'm in there by myself, thank goodness. And it's just a little bike cart. I mean, it's no weight to it at all. So I asked her to trot. And the sign on the back, there was a sign that for slow vehicle,
Sure,
orange
yes.
sign, starts to flap. Tap, 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 makes a very funny noise. And she, because I hadn't bothered to like practice anything or do anything with helpers, just ignorance, took off at a full gallop. I mean,
no.
I've never had a horse bolt under, because little teacup, the one we used to drive, she was so sweet, So I thought to myself, we're heading straight up the driveway, 1/4 mile now at a full gallop, and it turns a sharp 90 degrees. I mean, there's no way I'm going to make that turn. It's just, we will crash. I got down lower. Like, I thought, I better not be sitting up. I better get down low. And I got down as low as I could in the cart. And I'm holding the reins, and I'm thinking, I got to land this plane, because we're going to die. And luckily, it was June was my birthday. I'm sorry, July 3rd was my birthday, and there's alfalfa field directly, at the before we have to turn. I thought I'll just run her right into the alfalfa field because that will slow the wheels down, So we go into that alfalfa field, flying all over the place. It was probably 1.5 feet, 2 feet tall. And finally she stops and she turns around and looks back at me and she's like, what do why, and then I never ever drove her again because I felt so bad. I scared her. So, what a terrible thing to do. And I have not even driven since then.
Oh, goodness.
So we're going to talk about your course before we go today, but I'm like, I've got 6 Morgan horses. 4 of them are already riding. 2 of them are young. There is no reason, because I still have a really good harness, can probably get a better cart. There's no reason I can't do this again, because it is a joy to drive, and you'll get into that more. But now I finished my driving stories. Enough about me. But it's like, this is why we need to learn. You can't just pick up the reins because you know how to ride and think that you know how to drive. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, this is a really good point. And I love that you brought that up, Barbara, because I think that's a really common misconception that riders have. And I think, my example, my example of, learning to drive in town, and these horses who are just so well educated and so happy in their work, and they make it look easy. And, for drivers starting out like myself, in a lot of ways, it was easy. And I think it's easy to get lulled into the sense that driving is very simple and you just kind of pick up the reins and give a little cluck and off you go and nothing bad can happen. And, I think your experience is certainly not unique and probably not even uncommon, because, the amount of skill and education of the horse that it takes to make driving look easy, I think is really underestimated in general. And, I think as riders, when you see that carriage horse going by, or you see that team of drafts, or you see that mini, or whatever it is, I really want you to appreciate the time and the miles and the training, the education that has gone into making that look so smooth and easy, because it really is a testament to what has happened behind the scenes to get the horse and the driver to that point.
That brings me to my next question. What changes for the horse when we're not on their back?
That's a great question. So the biggest difference is that we don't have any direct physical contact with the horse, right? When you're riding, your seat, your legs are directly in contact with the horse's body, right? Through a saddle, perhaps, but your bodies are connected, right? And you're able to move as one being. When we're driving, oftentimes I can't even reach my horse, let alone have any sort of direct contact between my horse's body and my own. So the only point of contact we have is through those reins, right? And so not only that, but I'm behind the horse. So think about how, if you're leading your horse, you're bringing your horse in from the pasture into the barn or to the arena or whatever it is you're doing, and you're just leading your horse in hand. And your horse is likely going to position herself either kind of beside you or a little bit behind you, right? Most commonly, that's what we're going to see. And when we're riding, we're together, right? My heart is essentially over top of her heart. But when we're driving, I'm asking this horse to step out 10, 15, 20 feet in front of me. And I need her to stay attentive to me behind her, but she needs to have the self-confidence to step out in front. And if we're driving a single horse, she's stepping out in front by herself. And that is a very vulnerable position for a prey animal to put herself in.
Yes.
And so I think this is one of the biggest pieces that we really have to educate. Now, some horses come by it more naturally than others. Of course, personality is a part of the equation, but most horses are wired to be followers, not leaders, right? Yeah. Most horses are wired to tuck into line in the herd, follow each other. And when we drive a horse, we're really asking the opposite. We need that horse to step out in front by herself, calmly, bravely, and attentively. And so that's a piece that's very different than riding that we really have to deliberately educate. So we have no no direct physical contact. We have that horse way out in front of us. And then the other thing that's worth considering about driving, and this really plays into your story a few minutes ago, is a driving horse tends to be exposed to a lot more things than a riding horse.
Yeah.
Right? Even if you're just driving down to the end of the driveway and back, you've got that sign, that slow vehicle sign clanging on the back of your vehicle. You've got the sound of wheels on gravel. You've got most carriages have some sort of squeak or rattle or creak or something to them.
Sure.
Right? And all these pieces are just very, very normal in the driving horse world. And then often, you described taking your kids down the road to daycare. So how often do we take that driving horse right into traffic in whatever capacity? It may not be right in downtown, but there's this feeling that we can use this mode of transportation to go somewhere. I used to love, in my old neighborhood, I would go for drives down. We had a little corner store kind of in the middle of this farm community. And we would drive up to the corner store and we'd get an ice cream cone. And we'd hang out in the parking lot of the corner store and have an ice cream cone and chat to the neighbors. And it was so delightful. But, we're out in the world in a way that the riding horse may or may not ever experience. And so there's just a certain amount of life skills and exposure to the human world that the driving horse really needs to have that a riding horse may or may not ever get.
So true. Because a riding horse, you can go cross country more or less. If you're trail riding, right? If you're driving, you need some kind of surface. And usually that surface has other forms of traffic then. Unless you have vast amounts of land,
That's
or
exactly
specified
it.
places. Now we lived out in the country, so we were on gravel roads. So we weren't, although we did drive down to the place that had Friday fish fries, so
Delightful.
that was probably 4 or 5 miles away. But it wasn't like in town. And when you're in a city, it's a whole nother,
That's
the smell,
a whole other
everything,
can of worms,
traffic.
yeah.
So for sure. You're like, how does ground driving help people understand their horse better? And let's explain ground driving for someone who might not even know what that is.
Absolutely. So ground driving is, quite simply, it's driving a horse without a vehicle. So I'm standing behind my horse in the position where, if I was on a carriage, where I would be seated, right? Put my head in essentially the same place, but we have no vehicle. So I'm just walking along behind my horse. And so I really think that ground driving is a fantastic training for all horses. And
I agree.
You can think of it as cross training, right? Developing skills that you may or may not be giving a lot of attention to when you're riding. And a minute ago, I was talking about that horse having to be out in front of you and the confidence that requires and the communication skills that requires. And I find that these are skills that every horse can really benefit from. Whether or not you ever intend to hitch that horse to a vehicle, there's so much that can be gained physically and mentally from ground driving. So the communication skills, and you mentioned a few minutes ago, the direct reining. And so when we're ground driving, we have those two reins and we have our voice, and we might choose to carry a whip. And that's all that we have. And so it's a really nice opportunity to educate your horse's mouth, educate your own hands. And then from that position behind the horse, you can also have influence over his whole body in a way that is different than, say, groundwork or lunging work. You can see the length of his spine. Now, if you're driving draft horses, say, you're going to be kind of looking at your horse's tail. You're not going to be able to see over top of his ears, but you can really see the way he's moving his body, and you can influence the way that he's moving his body and the way that he's carrying himself in a way that's different from other types of groundwork.
Yeah, I'm going to explain groundwork for our audience. Groundwork with horses, usually you're leading them, you're standing next to them, or either they're right next to you or kind of behind you a little bit, and you may be going over obstacles or, turning left and right, things like that, making them back up. Lunging is when you have the horse out some distance from you on a line and you're circling them, and that's kind of a gymnastic exercise, building things. And you would start with ground driving. I'm sorry, you would start with this groundwork and work your way into the longer lines of being behind your horse. You can't just run up to your horse, throw some lines on him, stand behind him and say, go. That sounds kind of crazy. So you know, in your course, I'm sure you talk to people how to start safely. And it's more, I imagine, in the beginning, you are next to them as you work your way moving backwards. Things like that. So it's important. Safety is really important because they can't see you back there as well as when you're next to them. And that's, your voice is important, your presence is important, and the communication with those reins is extremely important because that's what you have.
That's absolutely it. So when we're teaching a horse to ground drive, again, whether or not you ever intend to hook to a vehicle, we start from that leading position and we do our groundwork, we do our leading work, we teach all of those basic skills, and then we move into a lunging position, slowly start to send the horse out on a bit of a longer line. And then we can sort of gradually morph from that lunging position. Eventually we'll double lunge or long line where we add a second line, and then we can kind of slide from there into a ground driving position. So it's a very gradual progression that happens.
I can see this as a real confidence builder for horses.
It really is. It really, really is.
So what do you watch for to know horse is really with you? You know, when you're starting from the very beginning. I know when I'm working mine and I'm shaping a behavior and they do it and I say, you know, like, oh, well done you. And they feel that, you know, affirmation, they kind of go like, yes, you know, I did it. And it just builds on that because I like to work with a more happy, I like to happy them up. I know the same thing with dogs or nails I'm working with. So how do you know a horse is really with you? Like, does it click? Does it something make you go like, okay, he gets it. We're getting there. And I know it's every day a little bit of that, but
there's kind of two main things that I'm looking for. The first is the ears. That, you know, before I give my horse an aid, a command, I'm looking that those ears are pointed towards me, right? Wherever I am, if I'm beside the horse, if I'm kind of to the horse's hip, if I'm directly behind the horse, those ears are coming back to me. If I don't have the ears, I don't have the horse. And then the second piece I'm looking for is in the response. So when I give the aid, when I give the command to walk on or whatever it is, do I get a smooth response easily, right? So in my groundwork early on, I'm looking for a feeling that I can give the aid and then my horse and I can respond together. So rather than like a follow the leader type where I go and the horse follows, I'm positioning myself beside the horse. I'm asking, whether it's with my body or with my voice, depending on, you know, where the horse is at, but I'm asking the horse to walk on, and I'm looking that the horse can respond to my aid and that we can walk together. So there's the sense that we are going together rather than she is following behind me. And so then as we kind of migrate that position, like I was describing, and we eventually end up in our ground driving position, I'm looking that I can give that aid and the horse is stepping into my hands. And
nice.
So, and this is the other piece, you know, in ground driving, as you get a little bit more experienced with it, whether it's with your driving horse, riding horse, whatever, is we really have the opportunity here to teach that horse to reach into your hands, to reach into the bit, that this feeling of contact comes from the horse stretching into your hands rather than just pulling back against the horse. It's the horse is actually seeking you by stretching into that bit, into those reins. And then, you know, when I feel that horse in my hands, it's like putty, right? I can just, in what I do with my hands, once we have that contact where I'm feeling the horse, she's feeling me, well, now I can shape her body as she moves forward. And the other piece I want to include in there in, you know, skills that the driving horse needs to really understand is what I like to call being self-propelled. And what I mean by that is when I ask my horse to walk, you know, I give my walk on, I give my step up, whatever my voice command is going to be, that my horse steps into this nice, comfortable, flowing walk and maintains that gait on her own until I ask for something different, right? When I'm behind her, I don't want to have to ask, walk on, walk on, walk on, walk on. I don't want to have to keep asking, right? It's almost as Simon says, that once I give her one aid or one command or one question, she's going to just keep doing that until I give her something different. So once I say, okay, walk on, now that horse is stepping into this lovely walk, I can shape it, trusting that she's going to maintain that walk, right? So she has her job, I have my job. This creates the sense of partnership.
I love that. And then the horse is going to feel good about that. You know, I mean, if he's been handled well, he's going to feel good about that because I know what I'm supposed to do. You're being congruent. You are matching, your body and your brain are matching, you know, what you want the horse to do. You're being clear with your direction and not being wishy-washy, which is why your lines when you drive are straight. And when I was driving, my lines, the tracks of the tires were crooked because my hands weren't steady and I wasn't clear in what I was asking. So that leads into my next question. What are the biggest mistakes you see people make when they start driving?
I would say the biggest mistake is not having enough contact in those reins. And now this is going to depend a little bit on what style of riding you're coming from. So if you're coming from something like dressage, maybe hunter jumper, this is going to be easier for you. If you're coming from anything Western where with an indirect rein, this is going to be a learning curve. Is that when we're driving, we actually need quite a bit of contact in those reins. And so what I want you to do, if you're a rider coming into driving, I want you to think about your hands and your reins more like your seat when you're riding than like your hands. So the job of my hands on those reins is not just about pointing my horse's nose in a direction. Certainly that's in there, but it's also largely about feeling what's happening in my horse's body. I need enough contact in those reins that I can feel my horse's hind legs. I can feel her hips. I can feel her spine. I can feel the movement of her body. I could close my eyes and still be able to feel exactly what's happening in her body. If you don't have enough contact in those reins, that becomes impossible. Now, I want you to notice I'm saying contact and not something like pressure or pull. So what makes this work, right? We're not water skiing behind our horse. That's not what we're going for.
That would be a mistake.
That would be a mistake because that would have your horse feeling like she's stepping into a brick wall, which is also not going to work. So
no, it's a good analogy. Yeah.
The trick here is I have a good hold of my reins. My fingers are closed. I'm feeling into my horse's body, but my elbows are elastic. So my shoulders and my elbows are able to move back and forth with my horse's body, right? So that then this is how I feel her, is that my upper body is like there's a strength here, but there's also a relaxation. There's a softness in my joints that I can move along with her body, just like you do when you're riding and your hips, your legs, your lower back are following the movement of her body. That's what happens in our arms and our upper body when we're driving.
That's wonderful.
So the biggest mistake, the biggest mistake is just, and I think it's becoming more common especially in some of the natural horsemanship circles we have today, where there's this focus on lightness. And I think this idea of lightness gets misconstrued in a driving context, because if we don't have enough contact, our horse feels like she's stepping all by herself into a black hole.
I could see that.
Right? That feeling through the reins is the only contact she has with us. And so we need to really make the most of that. We need her to feel that we are here, right? I'm here. I'm behind you. I have your back. We are in this together. You're not out there by yourself. And what I'll often see as a coach, as an instructor, is I'll see a student ask the horse to go and nothing will happen. And it's because the reins are floppy. And if those reins are floppy, the horse has no idea if you're there behind her, and she has enough of a sense of self-preservation to not just step on a whim and a prayer, if you will.
Wow, that's very good. You've been in the real world a lot with horses, and like we talked about before, usually if you're driving a horse, you end up with something around you, some kind of traffic, bicycles, people, dogs, because you're having to use a road of some sort most of the time. So what does a horse need from us in a chaotic environment? You mentioned before how those horses really need to know how to handle the world around them more than, say, a regular riding horse.
That's an awesome question. And the biggest thing here is your horse needs to know what to do when she's unsure. So, and, especially having spent many years training horses to work in the city, in these urban environments, you cannot possibly prepare that horse for everything she's ever going to encounter. You just can't. There's always going to be curveballs. There's always going to be things that are new. So, certain things we want to introduce the horse to. We want to introduce her to cars, to trucks, to trailers, to motorcycles, to, buses, right? We can kind of gradually ramp things up in that way. But the bigger skill here is I want that horse to know how to respond sensibly when something comes totally out of left field that we couldn't prepare for, right? And the example that I love to use on this one is when I was working in the city, every year, I think it was in May that it usually happened, the Canadian Heart and Stroke Foundation runs, I assume they still run it, a really delightful fundraiser where you get into groups of like 20 people and you set a fundraising goal, and the whole team works to raise this money for the charity. And your prize or your celebration once you hit that goal is you get to do a tour through your city center, and this thing like travels across the country, and it spends a few days in every major city across the country.
Okay.
So it's a bright red 20-seat bicycle. So we've got 5 rows of 4 seats, all with pedals. You've got a driver at the front who's got pedals and, a steering wheel. And then at the back of this contraption, there is an entire percussion section. We've got tambourines, we've got shakers, we've got noisemakers, we've got flags trailing behind.
Oh my.
It is absolute chaos. It is so delightful. I love the premise of the fundraiser. I think it's fantastic. So this big red bike shows up for like 3 days every spring. I can't prepare my horse for this. I don't have a 20-seat bicycle, right? And it doesn't even stick around for long enough for the horse to get used to it.
No, it's just pretty shocking.
There's going to be 2 or 3 days a year where we just have to deal with that, and we don't get to know when it's going to come around the corner and surprise us. So that horse needs to have the skill to see this thing, check in with me, and that we can have a bit of a conversation, the horse and I, to figure out what we're going to do with this. And so it's not desensitization. It's learning to communicate, learning to problem solve, trusting that partnership. And that goes both ways. I need to trust my horse, and my horse needs to trust me, right? Because when we're heading into town, if I'm like, oh no, I'm afraid he's going to spook, and I'm not trusting my horse, I'm giving him absolutely nothing to work with. Right. So I need to trust that horse, which means I need to trust the training I have given that horse. I need to trust the education that my colleague has given that horse, or that the trainer I bought him from, right? I need to trust that my horse has the foundational education to be able to work through this situation. And then I need to trust that the partnership between the horse and myself, that we know how to communicate through this situation together.
Absolutely.
And it's not always going to be perfect, right? It's not always going to be totally smooth. It's not always going to be seamless. But if we can get through it, if we can, that horse might spook. And this is the other piece of that is, and this is especially for anybody out there who's training a driving horse. I don't actually care too terribly much if my horse spooks, right? Horses are prey animals. They're going to spook. I spook. I startle, right? Yeah. That's just what I'm interested in is what happens next. I want to know that horse can have a moment of spook and then take a deep breath, come back to me and recover. And that 30 seconds later, you would not know that anything just happened. that's the skill that makes or breaks the day, right?
And that's all about trust and being congruent again. That he
Exactly.
can count on you to keep him safe. Otherwise, he's going to do it for himself. And
That's
sometimes he
exactly
doesn't have the
it.
best judgment. So,
If the horse doesn't trust me, then he's on his own, making his own decisions, and then we're in trouble,
right. Yeah.
right? Because
No,
then we're dealing with a prey animal with a flight response, making the decisions that a prey animal makes in a flight response.
with something attached to him, which
With
can be a
something
terrifying.
attached to him.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No. So what do horses end up teaching people through this kind of work? What do people learn from being around driving horses?
I love this question. People learn a lot about themselves. Most of my students, sooner or later, will give me this funny look and they'll go, "We're not actually training the horse right now, are we?" And I go, "Oh, you caught on." I spend a lot of time as a coach, as a trainer. I spend a lot of time finding ways to make it look like we're training the horse when we're actually training the human. And where this shows up more than anywhere, and I think this really says a lot about our society, our culture, our pace of life in the 21st century, is a lot of people will come to me with horses who have a hard time standing still. And I have certainly been here myself. I've had to learn these skills myself. And 9 times out of 10, it's not the horse that's the problem. It's the person. It's us who can't stand still. It's us who can't slow down. It's us who don't remember to breathe, who get into this rush. And then the horse just mirrors that. And then we have a horse who can't stand still. And that's when we realize there's a problem. But the root of the problem is actually not the horse at all. The root of the problem often comes back to ourselves. And this is where we really, as a coach, this is where I see which drivers are going to excel and which drivers are going to really stay stuck and struggle for a long time, is whether or not they can see that this is a me problem. This isn't my horse. My horse is just a reflection of my own energy, what's going on in my own body, my own brain.
Oh, for sure. No, absolutely. When my grandchildren come ride, and they're just learning, and I have an angel of a horse, a little Morgan mare for them to ride. And they haven't had much, we haven't had a really good spot for them now. We've built an arena and we're able to actually get out of the wind and the mud and the constant rain. So they're actually able to ride a little bit. And it was really wonderful. My eldest grandson is riding around in a circle, and I, instead of doing a pony ride kind of thing, I'm letting him actually, because April's so good, that's the horse. Go ahead, you can just, walk away from me and then circle, like control the horse. They're using just a halter at this point because they don't have the rein control, and I don't want to pull on her mouth. Yeah. And he was so proud of himself that he was able to, she was listening to him because they were working together. If we could teach people that right away, that they look to each other, they're working together. And he said, "I'm a little bit afraid." And I said, "That's okay. You can tell her that you're a little bit afraid, because she can feel that, Yeah. So what you're saying is we're going to worry he's going to spook, but then he's going to spook because he doesn't know you're afraid of him, and whatever. I love that my grandson's been around enough to understand, animals have feelings, of course, and that they can share the feeling and work through. And then he bent over and petted her and told her what a lovely girl she was. And that just made me go "Oh, good boy." Because a lot of kids just want to get on and, go. And it's not, I love that he was sensitive. But you're exactly right. Most of the time a horse has a problem, it's us.
That's
Same
just
thing
it.
with a dog or anything else,
And sometimes we have to fake it till we make it. And that's okay, right? Sometimes you might be feeling afraid that your horse is going to spook. Or you might, I find a lot of students, when we first start trotting on the carriage, it feels totally different than trotting when you're riding.
There's a bounce to it. And
there can be fear there. And that's very normal. And, sometimes we have to really focus on that breath. And I'll say to my students, we need your horse to breathe. So you need to demonstrate the kind of breath that your horse needs.
Oh, and, Christine, I love that.
We're totally faking that until it starts to develop. And that's okay.
That's okay.
Right? That's okay. Agree. If you can recognize it in yourself, okay, well, I'm going to I'm going to model what I need from my horse, even though I'm totally feeling the opposite. And eventually it'll start to develop, and eventually you'll start to feel that confidence, and your horse will start to feel that confidence. Confidence only comes from stepping outside of our comfort zone and surviving. That's the only way that we can expand that comfort zone. Now, we have to be obviously sensible about that. We don't want to just dive straight in the deep end with no rescue plan, but we do need to dip our toe outside of that comfort zone in order for it to expand, in order for that confidence, both ourselves and our horse, to develop.
Yeah, I was going to say the horse needs that too. I mean, we can't keep him, in a rubber room and
exactly
never let them learn anything.
Exactly.
Or build confidence.
I have a young horse in training right now, and we're doing a lot of work on the road. And, she's pretty okay with most cars and passenger vehicles. But then, the other day we had like a pickup towing a flat deck trailer. It was empty and bouncing down the dirt road and, clanging and banging and making all kinds of things. And, she did have a little bit of a spook. She jumped sideways. She stopped. She watched it. We stood and breathed for a couple moments. We carried on, right? She needs to have these experiences and survive them to realize that it's okay, right? There's no other way. I didn't die. I didn't get in trouble. Nothing bad happened. Right? We carried on. We had a lovely drive. This is the only way to expand your horizons. And so we have to be willing to take some measured risks, right? Not stupid risks, but measured risks to go, I think we can go a little bit further afield, and I think we have the skills to deal with it. And some surprises might come up. It's spring right now, so we've got, the birds that come erupting out of the bush as they do in the spring. And, we need to sort of to step out of, the safety of the farm and go out into the world, experience it, have these, oh my goodness, what was that? Oh, okay, we're fine. Okay. And then the next time it's not quite so bad. And the next time it's not quite so bad. And we just gradually build up that tolerance and that confidence until these things become old news. And as we do this, we're building that skill of learning how to work through these things together.
Right. And so they get confident together.
Exactly.
The expression like when you have a really good horse you're working with, that horse would climb a tree for me, if I asked her. I mean,
totally.
You trust each other so much, And,
totally.
Those are usually our heart horses that we remember because they're the
absolutely.
So, well, let's talk about your Driving 101 course that's going to be starting up quite soon. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So a few years ago, kind of during the pandemic, I was noticing a trend where, so many people, so many riders would be going onto social media, going into driving groups on Facebook or wherever else. And, okay, I'm trying to teach my horse to drive and I'm not quite sure where to start. Or I just got this harness. Does it fit okay? Or, all of these sort of beginner driving questions. And, for a long time, I sort of subscribed to the idea, well, green and green makes black and blue. And there's a lot of truth in that statement. And, the idea there is that if you're a beginner, you need an experienced horse to learn on, and a beginner horse needs an experienced driver. And certainly that is the best case scenario. There's no doubt. But the thing with driving is that not everybody has access to an experienced horse. Not everybody has access to an experienced coach. And there are a lot of folks out there who really want to learn this driving thing that don't have anybody nearby to help. And so during the pandemic, when all my clinics got canceled, I went, okay, well, what can I do to create something online, something that anybody with an internet connection can access that can teach those fundamental driving skills, that can help somebody who has decided they want to teach their riding horse to drive and can get them, pointed in the right direction, on the right foot, and having a good time, having a safe time, and learning, what they're doing without having huge disasters along the way.
Right.
And so Driving 101 is my online course that came out of kind of that place. And so it's a fully online curriculum, really geared towards riders who are new to driving. Okay. And so basically the course walks you kind of through what we've been talking about from the very, very beginning, groundwork, just leading with your horse, to ground driving like a pro, right? Ground driving here, there, and everywhere, like you know what you're doing, going up and down the road, all of the things, kind of right to that point where you're starting to think about being ready to hitch onto a vehicle. So Driving 101 is a groundwork program. You do not need any driving equipment. I designed it that way very intentionally. We can do all of this fundamental groundwork pretty much right into ground driving without spending a whole lot of money on driving gear. So we can get you, beyond needing a pair of long lines, we can get you successfully ground driving your horse, and then you can decide if this is something you want to take further.
And ground driving is excellent for any horse. Like I have the two young horses that are not under saddle. I like letting my Morgans grow, and so I don't start them at back them at 2 or 3 or even 4 very much. So ground driving is all this work I can be doing with them, so they're understanding that when I finally do get, and I'll have some young person get on them first, but when we finally do saddle train them, they have a clue of asking. I mean, it's like such a foundation. Whether
such
I
a
drive
foundation,
them or not, but
that's just it. And so, the people who come into this course are people who, want to teach their saddle horse to ride, or like you're just describing, Barbara, folks who have young horses that want to do this groundwork before thinking about putting a rider on. And we also get folks who are experienced drivers, but training a driving horse for the first time. And then we get folks who have an experienced driving horse, but they're brand new and they still want to go through those fundamental pieces so that they can actually learn what their horse knows. So there's sort of a few different types that come into the program. But we start from the very beginning. We work through this groundwork. We work through our leading work. We get into our lunging. We spend a lot of time learning to work on the lunge line very effectively. We move into double lunging or long lining, and then eventually we move into ground driving. And it's a 6-month curriculum. Some people get through it in 6 months. Some people take a lot longer. Once you join the course, you have lifetime access. So there's not any sort of pressure to keep up. But if you're working your horse several days a week, you can probably get through it in 6 months most of the time. And then kind of along the way, we're really learning about driving. So we include classes about harnesses. We can include classes about carriages and different vehicles. We sometimes will bring in guests who do different things. Recently, we had a guest talk about combined driving, which is like 3-day eventing, but for driving. Prior to that, we had a guest come in to talk about farming with horses. So we bring in people doing all sorts of different things in the driving world to just kind of give our students a sense of what's out there, what's possible. But the goal is that by the end of the course, you are ground driving your horse safely, effectively, sensibly. You're having a ton of fun. Your horse is having a ton of fun. And then if you want to continue into actually putting your horse to a vehicle, now you're in the place where we can start talking about how to do that.
Oh, that's wonderful. Wonderful. And where do people find you online? How are they getting in touch with you? We're going to have your notes and stuff, of course, connected to the podcast, but let's just say it too. How do they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So online, I'm ChristineBeattieEquine.com. Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, when I remember, I'm at Christine Beattie Equine. You'll find me most active on Facebook. And I also have a weekly email newsletter that you can get to from my website. You can get to from my Facebook page. It's pinned at the top of my Facebook page. It's probably the easiest way to find it. But I do send a weekly newsletter that's just, it's training tips, it's stories, it's, Great. A little bit of everything about driving horses. And then if you're particularly interested in the online program, Driving 101, it's ChristineBeattieEquine.com/Driving101. The wait list is open. We will be opening the doors next month, but the second week of May, I'm planning to open enrollment. So I open the doors twice a year. Like I said, it's a 6-month curriculum. So we go through kind of with the cohort, we work through everything together. And then we had to go back to the beginning every 6 months and do it again with a fresh group.
Wow.
So
Okay.
we will be opening that up in May.
For this podcast, it's April 14th. This podcast will be up within 7 days. So hopefully people will tune in and be able to get into that program if they'd like.
Beautiful. It's always, it's so fun to bring new students in. I've got students at this point from like all corners of the world. We've got Alaska to New Zealand and everything in between. It's really, really cool. We have some folks who are just up the road from each other. We have folks who are just up the road from each other and never knew the other existed. We have folks on opposite corners of the world.
That's so cool.
So it's a really cool little community we've got. And, you know, the other thing that I wanted to kind of bake into this course that I'm really proud of is this sense of community. Because,
nice.
You know, if I certainly had the experience when, you know, I was the only person at my barn who was interested in driving, and I had these draft horses, and we're sort of doing our driving thing, and everyone else is doing their hunter jumper thing. And it can feel really isolating when you don't know anybody else doing the same thing as you. And so we've got this sense of community where everyone's on the same journey and everyone's kind of witnessing each other, and you get to share your wins. And if you're struggling with something, somebody else is probably having the same question and is just too shy to ask. Right. And so we get this sense of you're not actually doing this alone. There's all of these almost 100 other people doing the same thing at the same time. So
that sounds marvelous.
Yeah, we have fun.
Cool. So in closing, what do you wish more people understood about horses?
Oh, what do I wish more people understood about horses? I think I would have to say that horses are very honest, and I think horses are always doing their best with what they have to work with. And, you know, I always get, you know, that kind of little tingle in my back when somebody says, oh, he's misbehaving. Oh, he's trying to get away with whatever. And I think so often horses are just doing the best they can with the information that they have. And I, you know, personally, my own ethics are I would so much rather assume that my horse is doing her best and needs more information from me rather than assuming that she has all of the information and is just choosing something different.
I don't think they're capable of that.
Right. And it's not to say that they don't have their own personalities and their own quirks, because of course they do.
They're not malicious thinkers. They're not trying to
I don't think they're malicious thinkers. I really don't. And I think
just horses, you know.
They're just horses, and some of them have a sense of humor, certainly.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you spend enough time around horses, and you certainly witness those who have a little bit of a trickster in them. But I don't think they're malicious. I don't think they're, you know, out to get you in any way. And I think when it seems like they're misbehaving, I think it's usually a case of they're missing a critical piece of information. And it's our job to put the detective hat on and figure out what that piece is that's missing and fill that gap in for them.
Exactly. Well, I tell you, Christine, I have learned so much. Now I want to start learning how to drive again. I mean, not drive. I've just learned how to drive in general, I should say.
For real this time.
For real. Because you know, what irritates me so much when you watch a movie is somebody, for my people that are only or audio, I'm bringing my hands up and down in tandem, like pumping up and down, you know, like the reins are flying and your hands bump because you know they're fake driving, and it just must make you nuts.
They're fake driving, and they're, you know, slapping the horse on the bum with the reins,
you know, and hitting them with a whip, which you guys don't do, and you know, just like makes me crazy. But I love that. Everything, we just learned so much today, and I appreciate you taking the time for all of us. And everybody, look her up if you want to learn how to drive and take her course. What a wonderful thing to be offering, because there are no driving trainers. I mean, they just don't exist in person anymore.
We're so few and far between.
Yeah. And it's such a wonderful ancient sport. I mean, good heavens, you know, and I think every horse would benefit, whether they ever get driven, but just get benefit from learning how to be worked from the ground and at a distance. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me, Barbara. It's really been a pleasure. And I love sharing this with people. I I so want to see more people in the driving world. We have so much fun here. And, you know, the driving community is very, very welcome of newcomers. And I think anywhere, whether it's online or in person, anywhere you hang out with drivers, you'll find that we're a very, very open, very supportive, very friendly bunch of horse people. And we take a lot of pride in that.
They're the lovely people I've met. I can attest to that. And they do care about their horses very much because they have to trust them. So
very, very much so.
Yeah, I think it's even more so than just some weekend rider that, you know, I really think there's a relationship there when you're driving. So,
there really is.
So thank you again, Christine.
Well, thank you so much, Barbara. This has been lovely. Thank you so much for having me.